Hello and thanks for watching my video. Today I thought it'd be fun to do a video discussing elite specializations, since I just did a video re-ranking my view the elite specializations from Heart of Thorns, because it's been a year since they were released. So I was thinking, what elite specializations could come in with the next expansion? Bearing in mind that we are unlikely to see further professions in Guild Wars 2, because they're going to use the elite specializations to try and alter professions and to give them new features. So I've got here a list of characters. These are all my characters. As you can see, I've got plenty enough, and I thought it'd be fun to actually take you through and to actually discuss what some of the different professions we could see have as abilities in Guild Wars 2's next expansion. I briefly want to just explain how I thought I'd come about this. In terms of elite specialization, I feel that it really had several different ideas for how they would change the class. For example, the druid became a healer. You had the engineer with its scrapper ability becoming a sort of melee type build. The same would also have been the case for necromancer, in terms of actually with the greatsword being that melee type role. We had the support of the Revenant, the Glint specialization, that was definitely support, as was the Mesmer's Chronomancer and the Elementalists, although you could argue that that was also DPS for the Elementalist in terms of the Tempest. The Thief also got more melee abilities with the staff, and the Guardian became ranged. So I've kind of arranged them into several categories, be it healer, increased in pet type abilities, be it minions, phantasms, or turrets, for example. As the scrapper also got gyro, so it kind of did get the pets, a bit new pets in that sense. Ranged abilities, some more support for other characters. Melee, some condition damage, because we did see in terms of the warrior with the torch have a lot more condition damage basis, and in fact the torch was run quite often for the warrior's Condi build. And also spellcaster, because I do believe that it's time that we see some sort of some of the professions move to more spellcasting abilities. So I'm not going to go into it too much. I'll probably just going to go through some of the different classes and explain what we have on here. So I'm going to start off with Warrior. Now the Warrior, if we find one of my warriors on here, I actually have a PvP warrior. Well, he's also my raiding warrior. He is my Condi warrior. And warriors have a very good place in the game in Guild Wars 2. And I was thinking, well, what is that they're missing? You know, you could go along the mechanical in terms of they already have a rifle, or maybe they could get a pistol, for example. But, you know, that also can give a bit more Condi, very similar to how the engineer works. But I actually felt it should take some of its emphasis from Guild Wars 1. And I do apologise for the long loading screens that we do have here with my game. It comes with playing on NA and a terrible PC. So, here we go. So this is I'm on my warrior. And you can see here, he actually has, if we look at the traits, he's running the Berserker Elite Specialization, and I feel it'd be interesting to go back to a build that Guild Wars 1 had a lot. And that was when, in Guild Wars 1, you could run two professions. And in the two professions, you'd have a primary and a secondary. Now, I would have a primary, and there was a very famous build that was very, very good at tanking. And that was the Obsidian tank. And this would be where you'd have a warrior with an Elementalist second skill, second profession, and you'd run things like Obsidian Flesh. Make you very hard to kill, immune to spells and such. And I think it'd be cool for the warrior to have some sort of spellcasting ability. So I would actually give as a weapon the focus. I would give warrior focus, have a bit more defensive abilities. Now, I didn't want to go too many defensive skills before people start going, oh, you're going to make things harder in PvP, for example. So this is actually the only class in my terms, apart from the healing class, which I consider defensive skills and skills to prevent damage, because at the end of the day you don't want a situation like we had with the Chrono Tank, particularly in PvP, where they could just completely tank a point and that was game over. So for me, the Warrior, having a spellcasting ability, not a major one like a staff, I think a focus could actually be pretty handy indeed. So moving on, we have the Reaper, the Necromancer. The Necromancer had the Reaper elite specialization, which hasn't really turned out that well. I actually loved the idea of the Reaper initially, so I had a character named the Reaper. He's got the Reaper, title, but he runs Reaper, but it's not very good for my Necromancer in terms of basically the power build that I was keen to run. And so I feel the Necromancer could go in a slightly different direction. It has the Condi ability, it has the pets in terms of the minions, it has the spellcasting ability, it has the ranged attack with Scepter, Focus, even Axe skills, Staff, and it has the melee in terms of the Greatsword with the, elite specialization of the Reaper. So for me, I'd wanted to go in a slightly different way for Necromancers. I'd love to see them go as a healer. I'd like to see them, first of all, given a shield, and this shield would be like this vortex shield, the idea that it takes conditions and damage and turns them into healing for itself and for allies. You're getting that support and healing role, and you could take a lot of damage with this, and the idea is you can absorb this. You'd have this new Shroud ability where when you go into Death Shroud, or Healing Shroud as this would be, you could actually save and absorb conditions all the time, keep absorbing those conditions, and you actually heal. You have a skill whereby you heal for the amount of Death Shroud you have, you heal it and cleanse all your conditions. I think it'd be very interesting to see the Necromancer using shield skills as an offhand and still being able to put maybe condition or DPS or whatever you want. Because it can still run Staff, because the Staff has a couple of Condi cleanse skills as well. You'd have the ability to run some minions. I think it'd be very, very interesting to see that. The type of skills, again, they're up for, sort of debate how you want to do that. So I think it'd be interesting to see the Necromancer as a healer. Next, we actually have the Mesmer. Now, the Mesmer, for me, had this support type role with the Chronomancer, some fantastic skills. You would have seen in my previous video, I did rate this the best elite specialization that came with Heart of Thorns. So what would it be this time around? Well, for me, I'd like to see it more ranged abilities and more ranged sort of attacking damage. So I would like to see the Hammer be given to a Mesmer, much like it has with the Greatsword, whereby you can actually inflict damage from range. I would think you should be able to take the Hammer, and the Hammer abilities, much like like the Revenant Hammer skills do, would bang symbols into the ground. So imagine a symbol like the Guardian has, banged into the ground with a hammer, and you can give support to your allies or give damage to the enemy. I'd like to see this come in to give the Mesmer a bit more DPS focused ability, just to sort of have a bit more ranged, functionality. I'm not too sure what the function split would be. Maybe to actually have summon a hammer based Chronomancer Phantasm that does a hell of a lot of damage, and summoning that or converting all your clones, for example, to Phantasms might be one that would be pretty interesting. Imagining summoning two mirror imaging clones using like an F5 skill that converts them to these hammer Phantasms that can do a lot of damage. It would see a lot more play, for example, of mirror images. So yes, the hammer and the be more of a ranged elite specialization. Next up, we have the Elementalist. Now, the Elementalist, for me, it's in a good spot. I don't think that it needs too much different changes to it. However, what I would give is the ability to use the sword. Now, the sword has long been a weapon that the Elementalist has been felt would be very appropriate. I would like a melee type elite specialization, whereby the Elementalist can actually go right in face to face with enemies and properly go hammer and tongs against them. Having a sword, for example, a sword focus would be pretty handy. You look at some of the skills of the offhand. You've got dagger offhand that you could use. You won't be able to use Warhorn, but I would go for an elite specialization that would focus more on in close-up damage. So, for example, bonus damage if you're within 300 range, for example. and again have these different functionalities as well, the overload skills, which I think are pretty cool, and I like to see different overloads come in for the next elite specialization. But I'd like to see a sword given to the elementalists only for the main hand, just to give some different functionality for dagger or for focus, and to be a bit more close range and really deal some quick powerful punches, maybe sort of some short bursty skills, kind of like the thief has. So for me, that would be the elementalist's new elite specialization. So next we have the scrapper, the engineer, sorry. The engineer, I think, needs to move away from this melee type role, and I'd like to see it again go for something similar in terms of support. Now, I know the engineer can already put out a substantial amount of boons, but I'd like to see that improved, and to be that more support character can remove conditions and could boost damage. And the weapon I'd choose would be a staff. Now, you think that's a bit of a strange one, that's more mystical. Well, no, the staff actually can be used in this mechanical type format, whereby it's this sort of mechanical device that can actually give out these regeneration, can give out fury, because it can pump out, like, for example, potion type things that can actually spread around your party. And so for me, that's how I would go with the engineer. Give it that sort of staff mid-range far line support, as opposed to going with the scrapper route. And I know there are already classes that can provide that support role, but I think for the engineer, with the ability to provide turrets, and I'd come up with some sort of other system, maybe not gyros or turrets, I'd go for something a little bit different to help the engineer give out boons and to remove conditions. That, I think you can come up with your own ideas, but I just think for the engineer it'd be something quite useful, and it would move away from a bit more condition damage, and I think the engineer would excel in that support type role. So for me, that's what I'd do for the engineer. Moving on to the Ranger. For the Ranger, obviously, we've got the Druid Elite Specialization, so it took on this healer role. But prior to the Elite Specializations with Heart of Thorns, the Ranger was kind of seen as a DPS class in terms of the Ranger with the longbow. It wasn't too much of a Condi. Occasionally you'd see it in PvP with the traps. And the support type role was limited to these stone spirits, or the frost spirit, the different spirits that it could have. So I would change that, and I would give the engineer the chance to go in melee. And I would do that by actually having this melee DPS type role with a mace. And a mace can do a lot of damage, and I would have an auto attack chain whereby at the end of it, it spawns some kind of spirit, for example, or something, and it adds a little bit of a boost for those in close proximity, some of your allies. So I think it would be interesting, for example, if you look at the offhand weapons that the Ranger actually has, things like axes, daggers, torches, warhorns. It has a lot of offhand abilities, a lot of offhand weapons, but it only has the sword, the axe as main hand weapons. So I'd like to give it a little bit more creativity for Rangers, give them a mace, think about actually having axe, sort of a whirling defense, and a mace axe type thing. Path of the Scars, you've got the dagger if you want to go Condi. There are a lot more choices that you can actually have. So being able to go in, face rolling, or not face rolling, but going right up to somebody and doing a lot of damage in their face, that's what I would go for the Ranger. For the Thief, it had an interesting role in terms of the Daredevil, and so I would go for an elite specialization that has long been rumoured, and that is to use the weapon, the rifle. And so I would go for an elite specialization called the Sniper. Now the Sniper for me would be a heavy damage dealing ranged weapon for the Thief. However, it would be a very slow weapon in terms of actual firing, for example a 2-second skill to actually fire, but it would be substantial amounts of damage. Now they said this would be the case for the Necromancer and it didn't quite work out, but I'm talking 8,000 damage for a special skill that it could use, the skill 5, that would have a massive, fairly long cooldown of around 45 seconds, but a 2-second cast time, and if it hits, you're doing 8k damage. Something big and strong like that would make the Thief pretty impressive for range damage, and would really be interesting to see how someone could play that, because it's like loading up a shot that's going to do a lot of damage, but you've got to make sure it hits because it can be blocked. But there may be some traits that you could run to make certain skills unblockable, so things like the Mesmer's invulnerability skill, maybe that could be worked around by having the thief run a particular trait that means that invulnerable foes can still be damaged, or some trait like that. That may prove a little bit difficult because a lot of foes can go invulnerable, and that may be tricky to work out, but maybe you could do it so that it forces a Mesmer out of invulnerability, for example. So just there are some ideas. I think the sniper would definitely be something very similar to what you see in Dragonstand, for example, when you have those Mordrum snipers. Maybe you could have some ability like that, where they fire a shot along the ground that can do a serious amount of damage if you stay in there. So that's an idea for the thief. Next we have the Guardian. Now the Guardian got a range type weapon in terms of the elite specialization with the Dragon Hunter, and I'd like to see it come back to the damage based short close range combat. If we actually have a look at the weapons that a Dragon Hunter or a Guardian has, it has a lot of different weapons. It has sword, it has a hammer, a greatsword, longbow, mace, scepter, staff, focus, torch, shield. I mean, it has a lot of weapons. And I would actually give it a new main hand. And this main hand would be a dagger, because I'd like to see, for example, a dagger focus or a dagger shield. Just something where you can actually go in and really do some really sort of tight, quick movement skills and quick actually attack skills. Think like the thief in terms of how quickly they can attack with their dagger, but it has the support to get in and do some damage and get back out again. I think this elite specialization would be pretty handy to go in, do some damage, get back out there safely. So really quick strikes, not in terms of long-term damage, but I feel that the Guardian could definitely do with some more close-range damage with the ability to use some of its different offhand skills. And finally we come to the Revenant. Now the Revenant obviously is the newest class. It got a lot of interesting ideas and that came in with the upkeep system, and I'd like to look at that in more detail. So first of all, in terms of what weapon it would get, I would go for a short bow. Now a short bow sounds like an interesting choice, because you can imagine there a Revenant firing arrows through the mists, and they don't take long to travel. They cut the distance in terms of how quickly they can fire at someone. They can rebound from targets. I think having the Revenant use a short bow would be pretty impressive in terms of actually firing arrows through the mist and some of the skills that you can have. But what about in terms of its ability? Well, I would actually play around with this upkeep and in terms of what it could create. And I would go for something that the Mesmer has in terms of clones and phantasms. The Necromancer has minions. The Engineer can have turrets or gyros. The Guardian even can have spirit weapons. I'd like to see the Revenant be able to upkeep pets, so that a Revenant could summon a pet, much like, for example, you'd have a Misfire Wolf. I think a Revenant could upkeep a pet. So, for example, you can see here you've got different attributes. So, the Facet of Darkness, so that it grants Fury, is a 2 upkeep. Same with the Facet of Chaos. Sorry, not Facet of Chaos, that's a 5 upkeep. But the Facet of Strength is a 2 upkeep, as is the Facet of Nature. So these are all upkeeps, and if you use too many, your energy depletes, and you end up 0 and they all get wiped out. Basically, all your boons are cancelled. Well, I would like to see something whereby you have a pet that has a 4 upkeep, so you could, in essence, upkeep them if you went to 100% and then put 2 on for a decent amount of time. But the idea is not to do that, because they would have very long cooldowns. So the elite skill is a 45-second cooldown. I would have that doubled to 90 for its elite pet. So imagine having an upkeep here, instead of being at 5 as the elite specialization of Glint's one, the elite skill here, the Facet of Chaos, is a 5 upkeep. I would have that as a 6, so that you can only upkeep this limited pet. Maybe it's, for example, a an enemy, a pet that does a huge amount of damage. Think of it as a creature that can do a huge amount of damage, and you're upkeeping it, and you can come in. So you're actually providing the ability to support your pet. Maybe it's a pet that gives boons, maybe it's a pet that does damage, maybe you have a pet that does condition damage, maybe you have a pet that immobilizes, or sort of different things. Maybe a pet that CCs, for example. So there's a lot of options for the Revenant to change, for example, to have all different pets. For example, you could have a healer pet, so a pet that just pumps out regeneration, and every attack it heals your allies. Or maybe it transfers health to yourself. Maybe you have a pet that actually does damage, much like, for example, you had a few of the pets that came in with Heart of Thorns. Maybe you have a pet that can absorb damage or remove conditions. So there's a lot of different ideas you could do with the Revenant in terms of, if it had the ability to summon pets and each pet was a different upkeep. That's my idea for the Revenant elite specialization that could come in with the next expansion patch. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts now, guys. What do you think should come in? How do you feel some elite specializations should go? Should they try and change what the class is? Because this is what I would like to know. Do you feel an elite specialization should enhance a class or give a class something different? For example, let's say the Guardian went from a healer type DPS class to a range class. The Druid elite specialization for rangers changed the class completely. The Engineer with the Scrapper again changed the class in a fair substantial way. The Revenant with the Glint elite specialization, who doesn't run Glint with a Revenant? It's very difficult to run a Revenant without that Glint elite specialization. So for me, the elite specializations do a big change to some of the professions. Others, they really enhance. Think of the Tempest, think of the Daredevil, think of the Warrior. They haven't changed the class too much, but they've just enhanced it. And so I'd like to hear your thoughts. How should the elite specialization work in your mind? What would you like to see happen with the next expansion? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and I'll catch you on the next one.
Raids, PvP, legendary weapons, how to make gold in Guild Wars 2, and MikeITalk. Please use these links below to help support my channel, and I'll keep producing content you enjoy.